And the time for this debate has expired. I call on private and local order of the day number 1.
Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Act Repeal Bill Committee stage.
I declare the House and Committee for consideration of the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Act Repeal Bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
No, I don't think the members are going to do that. They look at some other party. No, that's fine. Okay. Members, the House and Committee on the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Act Repeal Bill. And the question is that the preamble stand
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Chris Hipkins.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I seek leave of the committee for all of the clauses in the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Act Repeal Bill to be taken as one debate and voted on separately at the end of that debate.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Then the question is that the preamble and clauses 1 to 4 stand part. I call Porter Williams.
Mr. Speaker, in the absence of any other takers for this particular... Yes, I know. Mr. Speaker, I rise to take a call on the repeal bill for the Royal Foundation of the Blind Act. If we can just refer to the 4 sections of the bill and the importance of each of these sections to ensuring that the Foundation for the Blind, or as it's now known, the Blind Foundation, can ensure that it continues to meet the purpose for which it has been designed. So, Mr. Speaker, the Royal Foundation for the Blind Act, the title clause 1, what is important about this is that it gives the Blind Foundation the ability to now ensure that its legal structure and its status within the community is fit for purpose for the work that it needs to do. So the title is the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Repeal Act. What it will in effect do is actually repeal the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind Act, which was 2002, because of the need for the foundation to become an incorporated society. The need for the foundation to become an incorporated society is for the status and the conditions that sit around incorporated societies, which means they act for members. It's a membership organisation. And that's really important to the Blind Foundation because it is an organisation that it is not only for members, but it actually has the board, its governance structure is completely staffed by people who are either blind or have low vision. It is an organisation that is completely based on the needs of people who are blind and have low vision, including its governance structure. So everything they do as an organisation is for people who are blind and low vision. It's a completely inclusive organisation. It actually demonstrates some of the best elements there are of that, the phrase that's often quoted in the disability sector, nothing about us without us. This is an organisation that is completely inclusive, completely membership-based, and knows what needs to be in place for members of our community who are blind and have low vision. Now, why is that important? Because, Mr. Chairman, it's about being able to design facilities and services for people who are blind and have low vision because you know exactly what you need. It's about being completely member-driven, knowing exactly what members need. It's unfortunately what we would like to be as a society, completely inclusive for people who are blind and low vision, Mr. Speaker. It is set up, Mr. Chair, the foundation has been set up to ensure a couple of things happen. To ensure that people who find themselves in a situation where they become blind or who are born to the condition, that they are able to access appropriate services and have the types of equipment that people use. We all know about the guide dogs, and we're all completely supportive of fundraising efforts by the Blind Foundation to ensure that they continue to have those resources to provide services to their members. It's also about communication, Mr. Speaker, and ensuring that what we might take for granted, the ability to communicate not only with each other, but to communicate effectively with members outside of the blind community are in place. Now that includes things like access to Braille, and it also includes things like access to audio descriptors. Now I know that many of our free-to-air television shows have audio descriptors as part of it, the programming for people with low vision. But there are all of our pay TV and many of those things that we take for granted, like being able to access the Olympics and see the Olympics, or the top rugby games, do not have audio descriptors attached to them. So just in the passage of this bill, I want to advocate on behalf of the Blind Foundation that there is a way for us to go for people with low vision and with issues around blindness to actually have access to the kinds of things that Mr. Chair.
Porter Williams.
Thank you. To have access to the kinds of things that we take for granted. And audio description of television programs is just one of those things. The Clause 4 talks about the consequential amendment to the copyright regulations, in particular, I think it's Regulation 5. Now that is around ensuring that any of the publications which are produced in Braille will now ensure that the name of the association that has access to that is within the purview of that particular regulation. But in that regard, Mr. Chairman, I also want to make a plea around the government's response to the Marrakesh Treaty. Now, what that will do is it will allow greater access to publications that are in Braille to be imported into New Zealand, and for the blind community to have access to those publications. I understand that the government is willing. I just want to ensure that we just gently encourage them to do that, and I also want to encourage the government to seek out those, at least another 2 nations, I believe, need to sign up to this treaty for it to become something that we will ratify. So I would really encourage this government to think about that. It is a small but very significant matter, particularly for the Blind Foundation. They've been advocating for a long time for the ratification of this particular treaty. And I think as we're passing this bill through the House, it's an appropriate time for us to discuss the issues that will make communication for people with low vision and with issues of blindness a little easier for them. So I thank the Minister for bringing this bill to the House. I want to thank the Blind Foundation for all of their hard work, for their service to the community, and also for raising matters in the wider disability context. And I look forward to ensuring that this bill passes its 3rd reading. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I call